So I am making venison and lamb with a mustard and herb dry rub that I got from Auntie Arwen's. And basically we defrosted them and they're going in. Venison and lamb both, you want to do a hot sear and cook it quickly at a high heat and leave the middle just a little bit rare because it tastes better. Unlike pork, you want that pink center. It really, it makes it very moist, but you want a good heavy sear on the outside. I'm using olive oil today. This is a leek infused olive oil.
Okay, did they actually use olive oil back then?
They did. They used olive oil, hemp oil. I'm trying to think what else. They used a lot of fish oils, and they used lard.
Okay.
The fat rendered from animals.
All right. Did they actually cook with wood, like the setup you have right now, or?
So they would have cooked in a pit on the ground, as opposed to an above-ground fire pit. But we have fire regulations that they didn't, so we have to be careful of that.
Were fires frequent? Did people set things ablaze back then?
Yes. You've heard of the Great Fire of London?
Yes.
So that's because those houses, none of them had kitchens, because they had thatched roofs and the walls were made of wattle and daub, which is all very flammable. So people in London in the 14 and 1500s would go out to eat. There were little food stalls and there were community kitchens that they could go and pay to cook in, as opposed to cooking at home. And that was how they did their cooking. People who tried to have fires in their homes tended to have house fires.
Oh, lovely. Lovely, lovely. Okay. Now earlier you were talking about they normally use a different substance to cook with?
So they would have used animal oils to cook with?
No, we were talking about coals.
Oh, no, they would have used wood, and they made charcoal.
Charcoal.
So charcoal is made by taking wood and putting it into an enclosed space and cutting off all the oxygen, and it cooks it part of the way so that it turns into the black charry stuff and then stops without burning it all the way through, which makes it drier and easier to cook with, and it makes less smoke. And so charcoal cooking was normally how you do it. You wouldn't normally cook over flames. You would cook it down. You would let the fire go down until it is a bed of coals and cook over that because it's a steadier heat. See how the flames are licking all over the place here? This heat is uneven all over. Now for searing meat, it really doesn't matter, but for some things that you're doing, it will really make a difference in how your meal turns out. With coals, you get a nice even heat. So
you're saying it's too moist out today?
Yes. So when the temperature outside is hot, that doesn't really make a difference. I still cook just fine. When it's humid, when it's this moist, when the air is moist, the wood is actually moist. So you can hear it sizzling, and if you look at the ends of the thing, you can sometimes see water coming out. And that's just, it's still kiln-dried wood. It's just that it's so moist right now that it's absorbing the water. And we even couldn't get our commercially bought charcoal to go.
Yesterday was moist.
It was moist.
It was moist.
Level of moist that
I have never had a level of moist like this.
real Kingford charcoal would not touch.
Yeah,
Ew.
that was unexpected because that was my backup. So I have two, actually I can show you. So this is the one that I cooked in yesterday, and that was the last of the chicken stew that I made. But this fits inside my other cast iron, which I'll pull out for you. Have things on top of it. So this one gets filled with either coals from the fire or charcoal, and then you take this one and it goes on top of the charcoal in there, and then you put some coals on the top, and you can actually bake bread, you can make pizza, you can cook your meal, and it cooks all the way through just like that. but because it was so moist, we couldn't even get the charcoal to stay lit. So we didn't actually get it to do it. The benefit to using just charcoal is that I can cook underneath the canvas with no worries because it doesn't put off sparks. And the heat doesn't blast up like it does with the fire. Fire has heat that goes shooting up. Charcoal keeps it fairly steady and down here. So I was able to put the charcoal stuff over there and just let it cook until it went out. And then I moved it over to the fire and we boiled it because, like you do.
Yeah. So, how, like, is this what they would have used back in the 1500s for their cooking gear?
This kind of thing would have been used by the gentry, nobles, royalty, higher-ups. There are smaller versions that are similar to this, that are of lighter steel or cast iron. That would have been more what the lower caste people would have used. But more often than not, you dug a pit in the ground, and you cooked in that, and you would have a small grate, or you would have a tripod that you would put your pans on top of. And like I said, you build the fire at one end, and then you pull the coals down to cook over. So you have the fire producing coals over there, and then you cook with the coals over here. And so it's a nice thing. If you want to sit and be warm, you go on that end of the fire, and the food's cooking over here.
Nice. And so this is what they would have cooked also. They would have cooked something like this back then?
Sure, this is just meat. Meat wasn't as available, but this is a gentry meal. We're looking at slices of venison and lamb. Now they they had some mutton, so they would have had lamb. So this pan is actually a reproduction piece of the type of pan they would have used in the 14th and 15th century. It is not cast iron, it is beaten iron. Cast iron was much later. It was the late 1600s, early 1700s, when we had started coming to America, that cast iron became more popular, and it was easier to make. Beaten iron is ridiculously expensive. This is a $300 pan. This pan costs more than my tent does. But yes, as to meat, this is the kind of meat they would have, meat is meat, and they would have cooked it. The gentry, the nobles, the king, would have had access to much more meat. The king owned all of the land. And so peasants, like myself, weren't allowed to hunt most of the time. Sometimes they would do it on a festival day. They would say, okay, everybody can go hunt in the forest today. But most of the time, you weren't. So chicken was available because anybody can keep chickens. Even in cities, they could keep chickens back then. Pork was available because you didn't raise pork in a stall. Pork lives in the forest. You buy your bacon seeds, and then you let them loose in the forest, and they run around all summer, and then the fall, you drive them back into the city, and everybody finds their pig, and then you slaughter them and make them into sausages and food. They didn't actually feed them. They fed themselves because they could eat the acorns and the dropped stuff around in the forest floor, and they did just fine. And they hate fish because nobody owned the fish. Anybody could go and do fishing, and it was something that most people knew how to do.
Mm-hmm. And how was the quality in terms of their cooking? Were they very accurate about cooking their food back then?
I find that most of the food they cooked tended to be cooked in liquid. You did not often see seared steaks like this outside of absolute royalty. I'm sure that people did it, but we don't see renditions of it, mostly because they didn't have as much meat as we have. We are even in modern times, America has so much meat. We're ridiculous. We have a richness of meat. Most people eat that's the amount of meat they would eat at one meal, one tiny little medallion.
Yeah, so one little steak.
There's your size comparison.
Yeah.
That's 4 ounces of meat. And that would be a whole day's worth of meat in Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to stretch it. And when you want to stretch meat, you put it in water and you make it into soup. Because it goes farther, because you can add in barley or oats or other things like that. So, an actor's cookbook, which you can take a look at here. And it is all about 14th and 15th century cooking. There are about 120 recipes in there, and it is $20 for the soft cover and $30 for the hard cover. It's available on Amazon, and you're welcome to drop me an email and say hi if you want to learn all about medieval cooking.